Humanity's first steps into the galactic community came not with thunderous applause or fearful whispers, but with confused stares and bewildered murmurs. The massive council chamber, with its soaring crystal spires and floating platforms, hosted representatives from over 3,000 species. Among them sat Dr. He-Jin Park, trying her best not to fidget under the countless alien gazes fixed upon her. The Galactic Council had stumbled upon Earth quite by accident. A routine survey ship had detected unusual radio signals emanating from a seemingly unremarkable solar system. What they found was a planet teeming with life, home to a species that had barely mastered spaceflight within their own system. "So you're telling us," rumbled Council Elder Vax, his crystalline form shifting colors with each word, "that your species deliberately shares living space with other creatures. Not as food sources or workers, but as companions." The very word seemed to cause him physical discomfort. He-Jin took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was representing all of humanity. "Yes, Elder, we call them pets. They provide emotional support, friendship, and—" "Friendship?" interrupted another council member, their tentacles writhing in what He-Jin had learned to recognize as confusion. "With non-sentient species." The chamber erupted in murmurs and clicks of various alien languages. He-Jin stood her ground, pulling up holographic images of Earth's pets: dogs playing with children, cats curled up in laps, birds singing on shoulders, and even exotic pets like snakes and spiders being handled with care and affection. "As you can see," she continued, "humans have a long history of forming bonds with other species. We've developed deep understanding of their behaviors, needs, and emotions. This has led to mutual benefits for both humans and the animals we care for." The Council's chief scientist, a being that looked like a floating cloud of purple gas, drifted forward. "Our initial assessments of human physiology were underwhelming. Your species lacks natural armor, has no significant biological weapons, and your strength is well below galactic average. Yet you claim to have domesticated predators many times your size." He-Jin smiled, pulling up another hologram, this time of a professional animal trainer working with a tiger. "We compensate for our physical limitations with understanding and patience. Through careful observation and respect for other species, we've learned to communicate with them on their terms." The footage showed the trainer rewarding the tiger with food and affection, demonstrating various commands and behaviors. The council chamber fell silent, watching with a mixture of horror and fascination as the massive predator gently took meat from the trainer's hand. "This is madness," declared a reptilian delegate. "Such behavior goes against all natural order. Predator and prey cannot coexist in such a manner." He-Jin activated another display, this time showing a household where a dog, cat, and bird all lived together peacefully. "With proper understanding and care, species that would naturally be enemies can learn to coexist. We've found that many creatures are capable of far more emotional complexity than initially assumed." The council spent the next several hours grilling He-Jin about every aspect of pet ownership. They wanted to know about training methods, feeding practices, health care, and the psychological implications of keeping other species as companions. Some members were clearly disturbed by the concept, while others showed growing curiosity. "Your species requires further study," announced Elder Vax finally. "This behavioral trait of yours, this need to form emotional bonds with potentially dangerous creatures, it could be either a remarkable adaptation or a serious liability." He-Jin couldn't help but chuckle, earning several startled looks from the council. "With all due respect, Elder, humans don't see it as either. We simply recognize that all living things have the capacity for connection. Sometimes, the most dangerous creatures make the most loyal friends when treated with kindness and respect." As she left the chamber that day, He-Jin overheard several council members requesting detailed reports on human pet-keeping practices. She smiled to herself, thinking of her own cat waiting for her back on Earth. The galaxy might see humans as physically weak, But they had yet to understand that humanity's real strength lay not in their muscles or natural weapons, but in their capacity to form bonds with the most unlikely of creatures. The implications are staggering. He Jin reported to the council a week later. The Nexofang aren't just accepting our presence, they're actively seeking to integrate us into their social structure. They're treating us as family. The footage of her petting the Nexofang went viral across the galaxy. Species that had lived in terror of these creatures for generations watched in disbelief as a human in a simple environment suit gave belly rubs to what they had thought was an unstoppable killer. We've established what we're calling the Pet Protocol, Sun Mai explained to a group of amazed scientists. It's a combination of communication signals, physical interaction, and positive reinforcement that allows for safe contact with the Nexofang. As more humans learned these techniques, more Nexofang began approaching ships and stations with friendly curiosity rather than aggression. The creatures that had once been the galaxy's most feared predators were revealing themselves to be intelligent, social beings capable of forming deep bonds with other species. The moment that had seemed impossible, a human petting the Nexofang, had changed everything. It proved what humanity had always believed, that understanding, patience, and kindness could bridge any gap, even across the vast distances of space. 6 months after the historic first petting of a Nexofang, the Interstellar Animal Behavior Institute opened its doors. The massive facility, built in Earth's orbit, featured training areas designed specifically for human-Nexofang interaction. Dr. He-Jin Park and Dr. Sun-Mei Lee stood proudly at the entrance, watching as the first class of students arrived from across human space. "Remember your first time seeing a Nexofang?" Sun-Mei asked, smiling as a young Nexofang playfully phased through the station's walls, now a common sight that no longer caused panic. "Hard to believe we used to think they were mindless destroyers," He-Jin replied, watching as Jin Woo Kim, one of their most promising students, practiced the communication protocols with the young creature. The Institute had become the galaxy's premier center for understanding not just Nexofang, but all space-dwelling creatures. Meira Choi, another talented researcher, had already made breakthroughs in communicating with 3 other species previously thought to be hostile. "Watch your resonance frequency, Jinwoo," He-Jin called out as the young researcher worked with the Nexofang. "Remember, they respond to emotional truth, not just the signals." The changes across the galaxy had been dramatic. Trade routes once considered too dangerous to travel were now safely patrolled by Nexofang escorts. The creatures' ability to phase through matter made them invaluable in rescue operations, easily reaching ships in distress. In the main observation room, the Galactic Council's new Xenobiology Committee was meeting. They had been forced to completely rewrite their classification systems after discovering that many dangerous species were actually intelligent beings waiting to be understood. "The humans have revolutionized our approach to space exploration," declared Elder Vax, watching as a massive Nexofang helped repair a damaged station by phasing replacement parts through its hull. Their weakness became their greatest strength. The Institute's success had earned humanity a unique position in galactic society. Species that had once dismissed humans as physically inferior now sought their expertise in communication and relationship building. The very traits that had made humans seem weak, their empathy, patience, and desire to understand, had proven to be powerful tools in bridging the gap between species. "The latest reports are amazing," Sun Mai announced during a staff meeting. "Nexofang populations are helping us map previously unexplored regions of space. They're showing us safe routes through dangerous areas and warning us about natural hazards we never knew existed." The changes weren't just practical. The galaxy's understanding of intelligence and consciousness had been transformed. Species that had relied on force and technology were learning the value of communication and understanding. "I never thought I'd see this," Jin Woo remarked, watching a group of alien diplomats taking their first lessons in Nexofang interaction. The same creatures they used to send fleets to destroy are now helping protect their worlds. The story of the first human to pet a Nexofang had become legend, told in schools across the galaxy. It represented a fundamental shift in how intelligent species approach the unknown, not with fear and weapons, but with curiosity and compassion. Working through the night, they mapped dozens of different resonance patterns to known emotional states. The aggressive displays that had terrified the galaxy showed the same frequencies as mother bears protecting their cubs. The strange energy pulses that preceded attacks matched the warning signals of wolves defending their territory. "We've been interpreting everything wrong," Hejin explained to the emergency council session the next day. "What we thought were random attacks were actually carefully escalating warnings. The Nexofang were trying to communicate with us all along." The council chamber erupted in skeptical murmurs, but the evidence was hard to ignore. On the main display, they showed how the Nexofang's behavior changed completely when approached with the right resonance patterns. "Watch this," Sun Mei demonstrated, activating a modified frequency generator. The device emitted pulses that matched the peaceful interaction patterns they'd discovered. On multiple screens, they could see Nexofang across different sectors responding, their aggressive postures shifting to curiosity. "But what about the destroyed stations?" demanded council member Tex. "The lost ships, the casualties." Hejin pulled up a new star chart. "Every major attack occurred near these coordinates," she explained, highlighting specific regions. "We've discovered something remarkable. These aren't just random territories. They're nurseries." The revelation stunned the council into silence. The humans showed scans revealing tiny energy signatures near attack sites. Baby Nexofang, hidden in dimensional pockets that their instruments had previously missed. "They're protecting their young," Sun Mei continued. "Our ships and stations were unknowingly threatening their nurseries." The attacks weren't acts of aggression. They were defensive responses from protective parents. To prove their point, they showed new footage from their latest encounter. Using their modified frequency generators, they had approached a known Nexofang territory, broadcasting patterns that indicated peaceful intentions. The creature's response had been revolutionary. Instead of attacking, it had actually guided their ship away from sensitive areas. "We've established basic communication protocols," Hejin explained, showing diagrams of different resonance patterns. "Certain frequencies mean friend, others mean, we respect your territory." Once we learned to speak their language, everything changed. The council watched in amazement as recent footage showed a Nexofang actually helping a stranded ship, using its ability to phase through matter to repair a damaged hull. The same creatures that had terrorized the galaxy were revealing themselves to be intelligent, social beings. "There's more," Sun Mei added, bringing up new data. "The Nexofang form complex family groups. They have sophisticated social hierarchies. Their ability to phase through matter isn't just for hunting. It's how they create safe spaces for their young, hiding them in dimensional pockets where they can grow protected." As if to emphasize their point, a live feed showed a Nexofang encounter happening at that moment. A human ship, using the new protocols, was safely passing through what had once been considered deadly territory. The massive creature escorted them through, its crystalline scales glowing with peaceful patterns. "We don't need to fight them," Hejin concluded. "We never did. We just needed to understand them. They're not mindless destroyers. They're intelligent beings with families, territories, and a complex society we're only beginning to comprehend." The evidence was undeniable. The humans' approach had achieved in weeks what military force had failed to do in years. Through understanding and communication, they had transformed the galaxy's deadliest predator into a potential ally. As the council debated the implications of these discoveries, more reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Ships using the new communication protocols were passing safely through once dangerous sectors. Nexofang were actively helping with space rescue operations, using their unique abilities to save lives instead of taking them. Hejin and Sun Mei shared a proud smile. They had proven what humanity had learned long ago on Earth, that even the most fearsome creatures could be understood, that communication was possible across any barrier, and that respect and understanding would always achieve more than fear and force. Little did the Council know that this peculiar human trait would soon change the face of galactic society forever, starting with their encounter with the most feared predator in known space, the Nexofang. The emergency alarms blared through the Council chambers, their piercing wails drawing every alien representative to attention. The massive holographic display at the center of the room flickered to life, showing the destruction of yet another space station. Even the most composed council members couldn't hide their terror as they watched the massive form of a Nexofang tear through reinforced walls as if they were paper. "The Centauri Deep Space Station is gone," announced Elder Vax, his crystalline form dulled to a pale gray of despair. 3,000 lives lost. This is the third attack in just one solar cycle. The chamber fell into shocked silence as the recording continued to play. The Nexofang's massive form dwarfed the escape pods fleeing from the station. Its body, covered in iridescent scales that seemed to bend light itself, stretched longer than two standard transport ships. Multiple rows of eyes glowed with an inner fire as it phased its enormous bulk straight through solid metal barriers, breaking all known laws of physics. "We must take action," declared the Myraxian representative, slamming his armored fist on the podium. "Our empire will contribute an entire battle fleet to hunt down this monster." A bitter laugh echoed through the chamber. All eyes turned to the ancient Zordan delegate, their tentacles waving in clear distress. "The Myraxian Empire, weren't you the ones who lost your finest fleet to a single Nexofang last cycle? Your most advanced weapons couldn't even scratch its hide." The Myraxian's face darkened with shame. Everyone knew the story. The pride of the Myraxian military, 50 warships strong, had encountered a lone Nexofang in the Outer Rim. Not a single ship had returned. The rescue teams found only debris and the creature's massive claw marks etched into the hulls of destroyed vessels. "The Nexofang defies our understanding," the chief scientist explained, their gaseous form swirling anxiously. "It can survive in the vacuum of space indefinitely. Its ability to phase through solid matter makes our strongest defenses useless. We've recorded it traveling faster than our fastest ships when it wants to, yet it can also match speeds with its prey to prolong the hunt." New footage appeared on the display. A Nexofang attacking a mining colony. The creature's massive jaws, lined with crystalline teeth that could shear through battleship armor, closed around an entire habitat module. The assembled council members watched in horror as it simply phased through the station's shields, ignoring some of the most advanced defensive technology in the galaxy. "What of the rumors?" asked a small insectoid delegate. "They say the Nexofang is intelligent, that it learns from each encounter." "Confirmed," Elder Vax replied grimly. "Each attack shows new tactics. It adapts to our defenses, finds ways around our strongest weapons. Some believe they can communicate with each other across vast distances, coordinating their hunts." The display shifted again, showing a star map marked with red dots, each representing a Nexofang attack. The pattern was spreading, moving steadily through more populated regions of space. "We've classified them as an extinction-level threat," announced the security chief, a towering reptilian being. "If we cannot find a way to stop them, they will eventually reach our core worlds. No species will be safe." Another alarm sounded, and fresh data streamed across the displays. A Nexofang had been spotted near one of the busiest trade routes in the galaxy. Several ships had already gone missing. "Evacuate the sector," ordered Elder Vax. "Divert all traffic. We cannot risk." The Elder's words were cut short by an urgent message. A human transport ship had dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in the Nexofang's hunting grounds. The council watched in collective horror as the massive predator turned toward this new prey. "Warn them," shouted several voices at once. "Tell them to run." But the human ship wasn't running. Instead, it was holding position, and according to the sensors, they were attempting to broadcast some kind of signal toward the creature. As the days passed, Lyra's condition slowly began to improve. She started to regain some of her strength. Her body was no longer as cold, though it still lacked the glowing warmth that had once radiated from her skin. Her breathing became less labored, and she could stay awake for longer periods of time. But even as she regained her awareness, she still struggled to remember much about herself or her life before the crash. Ethan would often sit beside her, talking to her as she rested. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he needed to speak to her. He needed her to know that she wasn't alone in this strange place. It wasn't just the physical wounds that needed healing. Lyra was hurting in ways that Ethan could only guess. She had lost everything: her crew, her ship, her mission. In a single moment, she had been thrust into a new world, with no answers, no home, and no one to turn to. As Lyra woke up more often, she began to look at him with a strange mixture of confusion and curiosity. Her eyes glowed faintly, casting soft light in the dim shelter. The light was calming, but there was also an intensity to it. Every time she looked at Ethan, he could see that she was studying him, trying to understand him, trying to make sense of this human who had saved her life. One day, when Lyra had been awake for a few hours, Ethan sat beside her again, offering her some water. Her hand reached out slowly, almost hesitantly, and took the cup from him. She looked at it, then back at him, as though unsure of how to use it. Ethan smiled, encouraging her. "It's just water. You can drink it slowly," he said softly, his voice calm. Lyra took a tentative sip, her lips barely touching the edge of the cup. The cool liquid seemed to revive her, and she drank more eagerly. When she finished, she set the cup down carefully beside her, then looked at Ethan, her expression more focused now. "Thank you," she said in a quiet voice. Ethan blinked, surprised. He had heard her speak a few times, but her words had always been faint, unintelligible. This time, though, it was clear. She had said something he could understand. His heart skipped a beat. He smiled warmly, not sure how to respond at first. "You're welcome. I'm just glad you're awake." Lyra nodded slightly, but her gaze seemed distant again. She was still processing what had happened to her, and everything felt foreign to her. Ethan could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the fear, the loneliness. But there was something else there too, a flicker of recognition. Maybe it was just her way of trying to come to terms with everything she had lost. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra's health continued to improve. Ethan found himself growing more and more attached to her, even though he knew it was dangerous. They were both in a strange, hostile world, surrounded by unknown threats. He couldn't afford to get too close, to rely on her. But somehow, it felt like they were already connected in some unspoken way. She had been alone, abandoned, and in pain, just like he had been in the past. And now, in this moment, they were together. They were both survivors. As Lyra grew stronger, she started to become more active. She moved around the shelter more, even managing to sit up and stretch her limbs. Her body was still weak, but her eyes, those glowing eyes, began to shine with a new sense of determination. She was fighting, and it was clear that the will to survive burned strong within her. One evening, as the sun set and the light in the shelter grew dim, Lyra spoke again. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice softer than before, but still filled with that unshakable curiosity. Ethan sat down beside her, taking a deep breath. He had been expecting this question. It was inevitable. "You're on a planet called Kairos," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "It's far from Earth. I don't know how far, but it's a long way." Lyra's eyes widened slightly as she processed the information. "Kairos." She repeated the name softly, as if testing it on her tongue. "I don't know it." "That's because no one knows about it," Ethan said with a shrug. "At least, no one on Earth does. I was sent here to scout the area, to gather resources. I wasn't expecting to find, well, you." Lyra's gaze softened, and she seemed to think about this for a moment. Then she looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know how I got here," she said, her voice faint. "I remember my crew." And then nothing. Just the crash. Ethan nodded. He had already figured out that Lyra had likely been part of an exploration team, sent to scout unknown worlds. But he didn't press her for more details. Her memories were fragile, and pushing her to remember more than she was ready to might do more harm than good. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her comfort. "You don't have to remember everything right away," he said. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." For a moment, the two of them sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Lyra had survived a crash that had taken everything from her, but she was alive. She was healing, and as she looked at Ethan, she began to understand something important. She wasn't alone anymore. Ethan's kindness, his determination to help her, had given her something she thought she had lost: hope. And with that hope came strength. The healing process wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. With each passing day, Lyra felt the weight of her loneliness lighten. She wasn't alone in this strange, unfamiliar world. She had someone by her side, someone who cared enough to keep her alive. As the days turned into weeks, Lyra began to heal not only physically but emotionally as well. The strange world she had landed in was still foreign to her, but with Ethan's help, she started to adapt. The shelter, though small and simple, had become a place of comfort. There was warmth in the small space, the sound of the wind outside, and the quiet companionship that had begun to grow between the two of them. Lyra still had trouble remembering much about her past, but each day brought new moments of clarity, and each step forward felt like progress. It wasn't just the healing of her wounds that kept her going. It was the bond that was slowly forming between her and Ethan. At first, she had been scared and confused. She didn't know if she could trust this human who had found her, but now, after spending so much time together, she felt something different. Something she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever: safety. Ethan, for his part, never treated her like a stranger or a burden. He didn't push her to remember things that were too painful, and he didn't rush her recovery. He allowed her to take the time she needed to heal and made sure she always felt secure. In turn, Lyra found herself opening up to him more and more. She learned about his life on Earth, his mission to explore unknown planets, and his past as a scout. She shared small pieces of her own story too, though the memories still felt distant, like fragments of a dream that she couldn't quite grasp. One evening, as the stars twinkled outside the shelter, Lyra sat beside the small fire Ethan had started. The warmth of the flames felt good against the cool night air. She wrapped her arms around her knees and stared into the fire, her mind racing. There was still so much about her past that was a blur. Flashes of her home planet, the people she had known, and the mission she had been on. It all felt like a dream, a faint memory that she could almost touch, but never fully remember. Ethan sat beside her, watching the fire crackle as the silence stretched between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but rather peaceful, as though they had both come to an unspoken understanding. After a long pause, Lyra finally spoke, her voice soft, but filled with a kind of determination that hadn't been there before. "Ethan, I need to know, what happened to my crew?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the flames. Ethan's heart sank, knowing that this moment would come eventually. Lyra had been avoiding asking about her past for a long time, but now it seemed that the question had finally risen to the surface. He turned to her, his expression filled with sympathy. "I don't know what happened to them," Ethan said quietly. "When I found you, there was no sign of anyone else. The ship was wrecked, and the area around it was deserted. There was no trace of life, not even any bodies." Lyra's face fell, and she looked away from him, her gaze lost in the flickering firelight. She had known deep down that the chances of anyone else surviving the crash were slim, but hearing it from Ethan made it all too real. She felt a pang of sorrow in her chest, a deep sense of loss that made her heart ache. She had once had a purpose, a crew that depended on her, but now that was all gone. For a moment, she said nothing. She just sat there, trying to make sense of it all. It was hard to process everything. Her past, the crash, the loneliness. How could she be the only one left? What had happened to her world, her people, her mission? Questions without answers swirled in her mind, and the weight of the unknown felt like a heavy burden.